Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the House Environment and Transportation Committee. For our series of bill hearings, we're going to go a little bit out of our order. Since we have the Secretary of Natural Resources with us, we will call up House Bill 239, Natural Resources State Boat Act alterations. Mr. Secretary and Professor.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. Thank you for having me today. For the record, Josh Kurtz, Department of Natural Resources Secretary. I'm joined today by Sarah Widman, our Associate Director for the Fish and Boating Services. And I'm here today in support of HB 239. This is an important bill for the department, and it makes a variety of changes to the State Boat Act. And when I think about this bill, I think it's best to kind of split it into two parts. The first is very much technical, and the other are substantive. The other half is substantive changes. So on the technical side first, this bill adds the inclusion of electronically propelled personal watercraft in our state definition of personal watercraft. It removes the term Class A vessel from the state law, as the U.S. Coast Guard has recently removed all references to these types of vessels. It updates language around personal flotation devices to go along with the Coast Guard's updated PFD guidance. And it makes several other editorial and conforming changes to the State Boat Act to ensure alignment with the Federal Register. Basically, the Coast Guard has updated regulations, and we are updating our state regulations to match. Now on to the substantive side of this bill. Firstly, this bill will create a $12 voluntary non-motorized decal. And this decal would be for kayaks and canoes. And there's two reasons that we're doing this. First is that when we have a canoe or a kayak that is floating in the bay or one of our waterways, Natural Resources Police finds that vessel, they immediately launch into a life-saving effort. That takes a lot of resources and time. And what we find is most of the time what has actually happened is there's been a strong storm or a strong wind or a big wave, and it has blown the kayak or canoe off their dock and it floats away. So this program, again, voluntary, would create a decal system so that they would register these boats. So if they're found, NRP could immediately identify who the owner is of the boat. The second thing that it does is it allows us to tap into greater federal dollars. Right now, the federal government calculates how much funding we get to support the boating public. And one of the factors in that, about a third of the equation, is the number of registered vessels. There are other states that have this. Actually, Ohio has roughly the same number of registered vessels right now as Maryland. And that's because they have a non-motorized voluntary decal. So that'd be very helpful for us in terms of continuing to fund the State Boat Act. Another thing that this bill does is it increases some different fees and changes some fee structures. The first being changes to the actual registration to cover more of the administration and the mail. It's more expensive to send things in the mail these days. Another thing that this will do is create a tiered system for vessel registration and how much you pay for registration based off the foot length of your vessel. So under current law, all motorized vessels are charged a $24 fee for a certificate. This would create that tiered registration, which is very similar to other states like New Jersey and Delaware. And I think what's really important about this fee is directly a user pay, user benefit model. So the money in the State Boat Act goes into programs like the Waterway Improvement Fund. And these programs are really important because as we see changes to our docks, as we see changes to our piers, our local waterways, we need more funding for things like dredging projects to keep them accessible. We need more funding to be able to allow the boating public and help the boating public access the resource. And that's what the fees would go back into, is this user pay, user benefit model. This would also, put money into some of the things that we also do, like boater safety and things like that. So all direct benefits to the public. And to give you an idea, the Waterway Improvement Fund is one of our most oversubscribed programs. Right now, we're funding roughly 64% of the requests, and that's a 5-year average. I'd also like to point, we've partnered really heavily and strongly with different entities around here, including the Marine Trades Association of Maryland, which represents the recreational boating industry, roughly $4.2 billion economic impact to the state. So the focus of this bill is to, again, align technically with the U.S. Coast Guard, create this voluntary program to allow us to increase the number of registered vessels, and then change to a tiered fee approach to better fund our user pay, user benefit model. With that, I respectfully request a favorable report on on the House bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Are there any questions on this bill? I do not see any, so thank you very much. Colleagues, we will now, that concludes the bill hearing on HB 239. We will now turn to HB 1 from Vice Chair Boyce, the Maryland Paint Stewardship Act, and we're joined by our friends from the Economic Matters Committee, Delegates Queen, Valderrama, and Adams. If you have a panel or anything, please bring them on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because you've seen this many times, I don't want to take your vote for granted or your hearing for granted. So I am going to go through briefly and thoroughly about the bill and then let the panel speak. And so from there, I will start. Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, I am Regina T. Boyce, representing HB 1 Maryland Paint Stewardship. For historical record, this bill has been introduced and passed by the House every year since 2020. Last year, the Senate amended the bill requiring a review and report by a specified date, an evaluation of the program's net benefit, and reporting of total fees collected for each county. The bill passed both chambers last session. 10% of all paint purchased in the United States, about 78 million gallons per year, goes unused. According to the Paint Steward Institute, this costs more than $500 million to manage end-of-life paint in the United States, which is an average of $8 per gallon to recycle. HB 1 establishes the Paint Stewardship Program in Maryland. The program manages leftover paint, mirroring programs in 11 other states, aiming to decrease waste and promote recycling. The states include California, Colorado, Connecticut, Washington, D.C., Maine, Minnesota, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington State. If passed, Maryland will be the 12th established program in 14 years of the existence of the Paint Care program. Paint Care's largest and most successful program operates in Canada. HB 1 represents a proactive approach to managing post-consumer paint by mandating producer responsibility. By establishing a framework for paint collection, recycling, and cost coverage, the program aims to minimize environmental impacts while promoting sustainable practices in the paint industry. The inclusion of regular reviews and reporting requirements ensures ongoing evaluation and potential improvements to the program's effectiveness over time. Paint Care partners with paint and hardware stores, as well as solid waste, household hazardous waste programs, to identify and create voluntary drop-off sites throughout the state. Partnerships with household hazardous waste programs and government collection programs reduce the costs in transportation, recycling, and proper disposal. The program, a waste management initiative, is an extended producer responsibility model, which places the responsibility for managing the end-of-life products on the producer rather than solely on consumers or counties or municipalities. The United States has 136 EPR programs, laws on 18 products in 33 states and DC. These EPR laws protect over 1 billion acres of land and over 265 million people. Again, and for the fifth time, I thank the committee for their time and consideration for support of HB 1. Go ahead.
My practice.
Nope, it's already on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate Boyce. I am Heidi McAuliffe, American Coatings Association, representing the paint manufacturers who developed this program in the mid to early 2000s with the help of the Product Stewardship Institute. Delegate Boyce has told you pretty much the terrific overview of our program. We have been operating this program since about 2008, very successfully in the states mentioned. This is an award-winning program. It has won awards across the country. We believe it is so successful because it has a reliable funding mechanism based upon the amount of sales of paint sold in the state. And then our expenses really are 75% transportation, processing of this product. The rest of it is like administrative type expenses. There is no charge to consumers to bring back paint for management. There is no record keeping or reporting imposed upon retailers. Retailer participation is completely voluntary on their part. So there is no cost to retailers. There is actually no cost to the state of Maryland, as our product stewardship organization, Paint Care, will pay the agency for their time in reviewing our program plan and approving our program plan and enforcing it. So it's a zero cost to the state of Maryland. Our goal really is to collect all of this waste material from your basements and garages, divert it from landfills, recycle as much as possible in the most efficient way possible. We do work successfully with over 2,000 retailers across those 11 states that Delegate Boyce mentioned. And we are very proud of this program, want very much for Maryland to be our next state. So I ask for your favorable vote on HB 1.
Thank you, Chair Corman, members of the committee. My name is Drew Vetter with SMWK and here on behalf of Heidi and the American Coatings Association. I want to thank the committee for its work on this issue over the years and all of the work you have done on this legislation to get us to this stage. You've already heard from Delegate Boyce and the panel how this benefits the environment, it benefits local jurisdictions, Maryland consumers and businesses. Just want to make a few additional points. This year's version of the bill includes amendments made by the General Assembly last year to strengthen some of the reporting requirements on the program, as well as a requirement for MDE to evaluate the program's effectiveness and to make recommendations for improvement. I'd like to point out that this program has broad support. You'll see support from MDE, from the Department of the Environment, environmental groups, local government, AIA, and several paint retailers with many locations throughout the state, including Sherwin-Williams and Benjamin Moore. And I'd like to point out that paint stewardship represents an example of an industry-led EPR program, where we have the paint manufacturing industry saying there's a better way to dispose of this product and is here leading the charge. And for these reasons, we urge a favorable report. Again, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Corman, committee members. I'm Martha Ainsworth, Chair of the Maryland Sierra Club's Zero Waste Team. Speaking on behalf of the 70,000 members and supporters of Maryland Sierra Club in support of HB 1, the Paint Stewardship Program. I think that the sponsor went over quite a few of the details that I was going to hit, so I'll skip over some of them. You may not know that 18 counties in Baltimore offer paint collection and recycling to residents, but often it isn't convenient. It's at central location or only a few days a year. 5 counties don't offer any paint collection in Maryland. So the Paint Stewardship Program will make manufacturers of paint responsible for collection, reuse, recycling, and disposal of leftover paint, not the taxpayers. It's an effective program, already operating in 10 states, and Illinois was the last state to join, the 11th, and DC. It offers convenient locations for citizens to return leftover paint through participating retailers. The program will increase the collection, reuse, and recycling of leftover paint in every Maryland county, every one of them. Counties that currently offer paint collection would save tens of thousands of dollars annually. It's financed, as they said, by an assessment on each can of paint, and it will be subject to public accountability and oversight, and that's very important to the Sierra Club. This is the 4th year we've testified in support of the bill. Maryland Sierra Club respectfully requests a favorable report on HB 1, and we thank Delegate Boyce for her leadership and for not giving up on a piece of legislation that promotes producer responsibility and zero waste goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Jacobs.
Oh, man, went to me quick then. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Boyce. And maybe you said this and I may have missed it, but it's an assessment on each gallon of paint. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's a formula based on the volume of paint or gallons of paint sold in the state, and then a formula is created to then create what those assessed fees will be.
And what's the estimated assessment in Maryland?
There is no estimate because we don't know the gallons. So once this bill passes, the paint care program will have needs to create the plan. And in creating the plan, they will need to determine the volume and gallons of paint sold in the state to then create the assessment. And so for every state, of course, or where the program exists, it's different because there are different volumes and gallons of paint sold. I know the fiscal note says anywhere from 30 cents to $1.99 has been the average in other programs. And that is based on a pint or more a gallon and up to 5 gallons of paint.
Do you have any examples from other states of what they charge? Out of all the states?
Can I let
Sure.
Heidi answer that? Thank
Yeah,
you
I
so
don't care
much.
who it is.
Thank you. The average fee assessment on a gallon of paint is about 75 cents. I mean, the range is 60 cents to $1.30, but the average across the states is 75 cents on any gallon, no matter what kind of brand it is.
Yeah, there were like 8 or 10 states, I think, that were named that are participating. And I was just wondering if you had examples of any specific state. Or if 75 cents is the average of across all 8 or 10, is that what you're saying?
I can share with you a chart that shows the entire fee schedule for every single state. And I'd say from the 11 states that are operating, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of them are at 75 cents. Several are at 70. One is at 65 cents. There are a few at 99 cents. And then there is one that is $1.30.
All right. And are all paint companies participating in this?
100%, every single company. The way the law is written is unless you are participating in a stewardship organization or you set up your own collection system, you may not sell paint in the state. And that is consistent with all of our other programs across the country.
So if a company decided they didn't want to participate, they couldn't sell in Maryland, that under the bill?
If they didn't want to participate in the paint care program, they can set up their own collection system.
Or they couldn't sell in the state?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess you have to help me if I'm looking at this correctly or not. So I thought we kind of voted on something last year for 75 cents a gallon on
That
paint.
is incorrect. We did not.
Okay.
There has been no fee assessed, and I want to be
Okay.
clear, there's no fee assessed because we do not know the gallons of paint sold in the state of
Okay,
Maryland, which is determined
So
by
I
the plan.
understand. So if on the assessment, how are you going to assess per gallon of paint sold and then that'll be charged to the purchaser of the paint?
I'll let Heidi answer in a minute. So as I understand it, wholesale, when the producer gets paint, and I'm like Lowe's or Home Depot, I buy the paint at the cost it would cost with the assessment. And then let's say a gallon of paint is $13.50. And let's say the assessed fee on a gallon of paint is 50 cents. Then the hardware store, the paint store is going to pay $14 for that. And then they'll sell it to me for $14. Is that correct?
And that is correct.
For $14. And
And
with
50
that,
cents.
right. So it's $14.
Okay, so I guess you have to help me if I'm figuring this correctly. So if, just say, and I just used the number 75 cents per gallon. So if I go buy 20 gallon of paint, I'm going to pay 75 cents per gallon.
No. It's for products that are more than a pint, a gallon, and up to 5 gallons. So if you buy a 20 gallon.
Well, if I buy 4 or 5 gallon tanks, I'm going to have to pay for
it's
4 or 5
per
gallon.
gallon.
So anyhow, the way I see it is if I pay 75 cents a gallon and I buy 4 5 gallon buckets of paint, I'm going to pay a $15 assessment to have the paint recycled. So to me, I'm looking at if I use 19 gallons of that paint I'm paying $14.25 or
I'm not following
$50.
the math. So you're saying 20 gallons of paint at 75. So you're saying 75
So
times
that-
20?
Correct.
cents?
So that's $15. So if I use all the paint but 1 gallon and I take 1 gallon back, I'm paying $15 to recycle 1 gallon of paint.
Well, let me put it this way, Delegate Baker. If you never buy a can of paint in Maryland and you wanted to clean out your basement or your garage one day, that service would be available you to do so without ever paying for a can of paint in
I
Maryland.
understand. Thank you.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This could be for anyone at the panel. I'm just trying to understand. So where would the collection sites be? I'm just trying to wrap my head around logistically what this looks like.
So when the law is passed, our team will come out here and start working right away with the existing infrastructure. So the counties and municipalities that are currently collecting paint, I think Martha said there were 18 of them. There are 5 counties that are not collecting currently. We would start with those particular locations to start building our collection network. That doesn't make it any more convenient or easy for your residents. The way we make it more convenient and easier for residents is we go out to retail locations that sell paint. So hardware stores, construction stores, reuse stores, resale stores, any store that is currently selling paint or familiar with construction materials would be eligible to participate as a collection location. And we ask them to volunteer. We set up the collection station at their place. We provide all the materials, training for their staff to do so. In that way, we can make this much easier for residents of Maryland to manage the end of life of their paint.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, if I may follow up. So a follow up to that. So if we're collecting at hardware stores or, big box stores like Lowe's and Home Depot and places like that, what happens? Because my understanding is that the cans themselves, the paint cans, are not recyclable. So what happens with that can? Is that retailer then on the hook for having to dispose of that can? I just want to wrap my brain around that.
I want to say this. So those sites are just the site. Paint Care comes and collects all of that paint. So they're just the holding site. Paint Care comes and takes all of that paint. And so of the number I quoted of the 78 million gallons across the country, it is estimated that 85% of that is recyclable. And that is the type of recycling where you go to a reuse store and you get somebody's extra cream color bucket of eggshell paint, or they can use it to make new tints. Of that 15 to 10%, they properly dispose of that. So it's the company. Not the hardware store, that has to actually manage the removal of it. It is the program.
What happens though, Delegate, if someone brings a type of paint? Like I read the retailers have a issue with spray paint. What happens if someone brings spray paint and leaves spray paint cans there? What happens to the retailer then at that point?
We do provide retailers an exhaustive list of all the paints that are collectible through this program. It inevitably happens, however, though, that, stuff ends up in our collection bin that are not on our program list. We always manage that. I mean, all of our haulers are hazardous waste haulers. So whether it's a spray paint or if it's, a can of solvents that looked like it might have been a paint can, we're going to take that and manage it anyway. We're not going to leave that for the retailer to deal with.
Okay, and so there would be no additional cost to the retailer?
There is no
okay,
cost.
Gotcha.
Nope. So when we pay the assessment, we essentially pay for the program.
Okay, thank you.
And I just wanted Delegate Naraki to point you to page 8 of the bill, lines 4 through 8, about where the site should be across the state for the convenience of the consumer.
Okay, thank you, Delegate.
Delegate Celebrity.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going through this list here, I see that there are 4 pages of folks who are for it and 3 pages of companies that are opposed to it. Is there a theme as to why they're opposed to it? One strand perhaps, or is it all over the map?
I couldn't tell you if there's written testimony. I'm happy to go over it to figure out the why, but I do not know, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I apologize.
I do just want to note for the committee, a lot of individuals are signing up pro and con on the bills in this committee without submitting any testimony. We don't know who those people are or why they're doing that. And it's a lot of repeat names. So I would not just go by quantity when you're looking through your list of testimony. Just a general observation I have from the first few weeks of work here. Delegate Love, you still have a question? Nope. All right. Delegate Jacobs, second bite at the apple for a bill you're hearing for the seventh time.
I just gotta, I just have one quick follow-up that just came to me right while we were listening. Do the participating paint companies, do they pay when they buy the paint, or is this charge only when they sell the paint?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So let's say Sherwin-Williams has a truck come in with a delivery, he's got 500 gallons of paint on it. Do they pay that fee on that end and then charge the customer when they buy the paint? Is it one-time charge only on the end user, or is there a charge on the front end when the company brings it in?
The way it works is the paint manufacturer will estimate their sales in the state of Maryland. So then they will multiply whatever our estimated fee is by their sales, send that money directly to Paint Care as that basically sets our budget. So when that manufacturer sells its paint, that fee is already included in the paint sales to the distributor and then to the retailer, and the retailer includes that fee to the consumer.
So it's one time.
So it's a one-time fee assessment on the product.
I'll talk about it subcommittee. Thank you.
Okay, I do not see any other questions for this panel. We do have another group of in-person favorable testimony. Chaz Miller from the Maryland Recycling Network and William Corsilius from the Baltimore Department of Public Works, if you both want to come up. Please, one of you just go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm Chaz Miller. I chair the Maryland Recycling Network's Legislative Task Force. Our members are public sector recycling managers, private sector recyclers, and advocates. Our members manage many of the local government paint collection programs in Maryland. We support HB1 and we thank Delegate Boyce for introducing this bill. 10 states and the District of Columbia have paint stewardship laws. They are successfully recycling the used paint back into paint. And by the way, thanks to the miracle of the internet, I just checked, they also recycle the cans back into new cans. Paint is a unique product, usually used shortly after purchase. The visible recycling fee is a great reminder to those buyers to recycle what is left after they've used what they need. And they can keep the cans and the unused paint out of landfills. Speedy passage of this bill will be a boon to Maryland's environment. We urge the rapid adoption of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, William Corsilius with Baltimore City Department of Public Works. First off, I'd like to thank the Vice Chair for continually sponsoring this bill, and we hope this is the year that we finally get it across the finish line. I would like to bring up the cost savings that it would have for municipalities and localities. Baltimore City hosts a household hazardous waste events for residents 1 week in a month from April through October at the city's Northeast Residential Drop-Off Center. The materials dropped off at these events are collected by a vendor who safely collects and disposes of that material. Paint is always the most largest expense of all the materials collected. Each year, the average cost per month runs upwards of $4,500 per month. So we see this as certainly a cost savings that would be for Baltimore City as well as for other localities. Lastly, obviously the health and environmental safety that comes with anytime we get to reduce, reuse, recycle household hazardous waste products. We always see that as a win for the consumer and the environment at large. So for these reasons, we respectfully ask for a favorable report.
Thank you both. I do not see any questions for this panel. We do have an online favorable witness.
Thank you.
Scott Castle, Product Stewardship Institute. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Chair Corman, members of the committee, my name is Scott Cassell. I'm CEO and founder of the Product Stewardship Institute, or PSI. I'm here in strong support of HB1. PSI is a 23-year-old national nonprofit with membership from 47 state agencies and hundreds of local governments, including many in Maryland. I personally worked with the paint industry and other stakeholders for 4 years, starting way back in 2003, to mediate a model agreement that was signed in 2007 by the paint industry, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, numerous state and local governments, and paint recyclers. This model is the basis for laws now enacted in 11 states and the District of Columbia that have resulted in the collection of over 60 million gallons of paint. It is also the basis for HB1. Maryland residents generate 1.3 million gallons of leftover paint each year, and most of this paint is disposed in the trash or down household and storm drains because governments cannot afford the millions of dollars in cost per year to collect and manage all of it. Enacting HB1 would provide millions of dollars of financial benefits to Maryland municipalities, establish new convenient locations for residents to drop off their paint year-round, increase paint reuse and recycling, protect Maryland's water bodies and reduce greenhouse gas impacts, and support recycling sector jobs. Our organization evaluated several state paint care programs and found widespread satisfaction among retailers, painting contractors, municipal governments, and paint consumers. PSI requests a favorable report on HB1. Thank you.
Thank you. I do not see any questions. So colleagues, that concludes the bill hearing on HB1. We'll now turn to HB 168, Environment Plastic Products Post-Consumer Recycled Content Program from our very own Delegate Terrassa, and our Economic Matters friends will be staying on with us for this bill as well. And feel free to bring up a panel, Delegate Terrassa.
Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, Chairman Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, maybe, and esteemed colleagues on the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Jen Terrassa. Thank you for this opportunity to present House Bill 168, which establishes a post-consumer recycled content program for plastics in Maryland, a reintroduction of a bill from last year and the year before. This is my third year working on the legislation that seeks to reduce the demand for virgin plastic, create a market for post-consumer recycled material. So what's the problem this is trying to solve? As the committee knows, plastic recycling is failing. In fact, estimates are that only between 8 and 12% of plastic is recycled. Approximately 40% post-consumer plastic goes to landfills, 25% is incinerated, and 19% is disposed of in unmanaged dumps or otherwise makes its way into the environment. The problem is both one of collection, which we hopefully will be addressing in my bottle deposit bill later this session, and also one of being able to use or have a market for what is collected. The problem with using what is collected is that using recycled plastic material is more expensive than using virgin material. So the goal here is HB 168 attempts to address this by requiring a percentage of plastic products that are sold, offered for sale, or distributed in Maryland to come from post-consumer recycled material. In other words, the recycling material collected. By creating more demand for post-consumer plastic, Maryland will develop a robust market for recycled plastic, which will contribute to the contribute to the objectives of HB 164, the Recycled Market Development Bill, sponsored by Speaker Pro Tem Stein and passed by this legislature in 2021. Over time, the hope is that this legislation will encourage cleaner recycling, increase the usability of recycled materials, and incentivize producers to redesign their products to be more recyclable. So what HB 168 does is establishes a post-consumer recycled content program to be administered by MDE and requires producers of certain plastic products that are sold, offered for sale, or distributed in the state to meet minimum post-consumer recycled content requirements to register with the department and to pay annual fees to the department to cover the program costs. This bill enhances, this year's bill, I should say, enhances MDE's oversight of the PCR program. MDE may conduct audits and investigate for compliance, enter into contracts for services to implement the program, and post a list of registered products and covered brand online annually and adopt regulations. Plus, MDE must contract with a research university or independent third-party program to evaluate the program 5 years after its inception. If the minimum percentage is not met, producers face a penalty of 20 cents per pound of recycled content short of the target. And MDE may reduce the administrative penalties for missing a target due to different market situations, and they may also waive those penalties. This bill sets progressively higher PCR requirements over time. And these goals, I should mention, are in line with other states in European Union that have enacted plastic PCR content legislation. Plus, these percentages are similar to the stated goals of several multinational corporations. And please note, the program is self-financing with a dedicated fund. So just give me a minute here. I'm looking for. Okay, so we are in a plastic a plastic pollution crisis. HB 168 will help by replacing virgin plastic with recycled content and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and fossil fuel extraction. It will create incentives for producers to redesign their product to be more recyclable, and it will stimulate local markets for plastic recycling. As this is the third year in a row that we have heard this bill, I didn't arrange for a large panel of witnesses, but you will see from the submitted written testimony, there is strong support for this bill. If we truly want to address the challenge of recycling plastic, consumers can't do it alone. We aren't stupid or lazy. We don't just need more education. We need producers to do their part, and we can't delay any further. I respectfully urge a favorable report on HB 168. Thank you. And now I'd like to pass things off to Martha Ainsworth, the chair of Maryland Sierra Club's Zero Waste team, to further talk about the bill.
Good afternoon again. Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and committee members. I'm Martha Ainsworth, the chair of the Sierra Club's Zero Waste team, Maryland, and speaking in support of HB 168. As the delegate said, this bill will stimulate recycling markets, reduce plastic waste and greenhouse gas emissions, and provide an incentive for product redesign for recyclability. It'll reduce greenhouse gas emissions by increasing the recycled content of plastic products, reducing use and production of virgin plastic, which generates greenhouse gas emissions at every stage of its life cycle. Multinational corporations have set voluntary recycled content targets for plastic packaging, but voluntary targets are not enough. A recycled content mandate would affect all producers and create a steady demand for recycled plastic that replaces cheaper virgin plastic. It would reduce plastic waste and create incentives to redesign products for recyclability, which can result in greater supply of post-consumer plastic. 5 states have already passed mandatory plastic post-consumer recycled content laws. In 2021, the General Assembly adopted a recycling market development law. Recycled content mandates are a major policy tool for developing recycling markets. The targets and timelines in HB 168 are consistent with those in other states, ambitious but not infeasible. The bill has benefited from consultation with government agencies in 2 states that have adopted similar laws. It's been amended to address testimony from last year. According to the fiscal note, it pays for itself and it's budget neutral. If you act now, the first recycled content targets would be met in January 2026. There's no reason to wait. Let's get this done. The Sierra Club respectfully requests a favorable report on HB 168. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Delegate Terrazas, for bringing the bill. I certainly support the concept. I voted for it in the past, but I do have one question. It occurred to me as I was listening to the testimony. And I'm not an attorney, so I know you are, so maybe you could just answer this. The Interstate Commerce Clause, the U.S. Constitution, how wouldn't this, like, say you can not sell something in Maryland, violate that in some way? Has that been questioned or litigated at all? Do you know? I know you said 5 states are doing it, but has it been challenged anywhere?
I honestly don't know.
Okay,
California, Connecticut, New Jersey, Maine, and Washington State all have these bills.
okay.
Connecticut is a new one, but
But
the other
it
four,
hasn't been challenged in the courts yet.
not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you so much.
No.
Thank you, Delegate Healy. I do not see any further questions for this panel, so thank you. We will bring up our one in-person favorable amendment witness, which is Chaz Miller from the Maryland Recycling Network.
Thank you. I'm Chaz Miller. I chair the Maryland Recycling Network's Legislative Task Force. Our members are public service recycling managers, private sector recyclers, and advocates. Our members manage curbside recycling programs throughout Maryland and either own and operate or contract with recycling processing facilities. We support HB 168 with suggested changes, and we thank Delegate Terrassa for introducing this bill. Recycled content laws send a message to product and packaging manufacturers to support recycling by using recycled materials in their products. HB 168 establishes very challenging goals. Some may not be achievable. All recyclables suffer product loss during collection, processing, and remanufacturing. 2,000 bottles simply cannot be made from 2,000 bottles. In addition, recycled plastics often have end users who make products not covered by this law. Kohler HDPE resin in particular, which is used in bottles for personal care and household cleaning products, consists of resin that has been dyed different colors. And in the recycling process, those resins cannot be taken out of the Kohler HDPE. As a result, you end up with a gray or a black resin. There are great markets for that material, primarily piping that's used in new construction, water lines, sewer lines, et cetera. Those are very good markets that Maryland MRFs currently rely upon for the Kohler HDPE. And we believe that successful legislation will recognize the existence of competing markets. We suggest reconsideration of some of the recycled content requirements, perhaps some rethinking of just a couple of them, and a waiver provision which specifically includes FDA regulatory requirements, technological feasibility, and inadequate supply, similar to the approach taken in the state of New Jersey. We congratulate the sponsors of this bill for this legislation, and we look forward to working with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for this witness? I do not see any. We do have a favorable amendment virtual witness, Kate Bailey from the Association of Plastic Recyclers. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify remotely. My name is Kate Bailey. I'm here with the Association of Plastic Recyclers. We are testifying in support of HB 168 with suggested changes. The Association of Plastic Recyclers is the only national organization focused exclusively on improving the recycling of plastics. We represent hundreds of companies working every day across the U.S. to recycle your plastic bottles, milk jugs, yogurt tubs, and other plastic packaging. We recycle over 5 billion pounds of post-consumer plastic packaging every year, but we are here because we can and want to do better, and we need your help as legislators to drive the economics to support better recycling. While recycling has tremendous environmental benefits, it is first and foremost a business. Recyclers compete to sell recycled plastic as a replacement to virgin plastics. Unfortunately, we continue to see volatility in companies' decisions and willingness to buy recycled content instead of virgin plastic. We need recycled content mandates like this to ensure there are strong markets for recycled materials. I want to draw a parallel here with renewable energy. By setting renewable energy goals in Maryland, the state sent the market signal to give companies the financial assurance to invest in renewable energy production and to move away from fossil fuels. In short, we need to do the same thing for recycling. We need to ensure that there is the strong market demand so that recyclers can invest in more infrastructure and improve recycling programs across Maryland. Lastly, I want to underscore that this bill is complementary to the EPR for packaging needs assessment that's underway. It is not an either or, and it does not need wait for the EPR study or any other programs to move forward. We appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do not see any questions. So colleagues, we'll move on to our favorable amendment, or excuse me, our unfavorable panel. Let's bring up Adam Peer from the American Chemistry Council, Sarah Price, Maryland Retailers Alliance, Rob Keefe, Ameripen. Please just sit down and go ahead. One of you's got to go.
Thank you, Chair Corman and members of the committee. My name is Rob Keefe and I represent Ameripen, which is the trade association for the packaging industry. Ameripen supports packaging policy solutions that are results-based, effective and efficient, and equitable and fair. HB 168 does not currently meet this test, therefore we are taking an opposed position today. Recycled content mandates can have a significant as well as unintended consequences on material markets. As referenced in HB 168 itself, sufficient supply of high-quality materials may not actually be available to meet mandatory targets, making the recycling rates mandated in the bill difficult or potentially impossible for some products to achieve. We would suggest that a provision be included to require MDE to conduct a market assessment of available PCR material to determine if the mandates proposed in HB 168 are feasible before they would go into effect. The provisions requiring producers to achieve compliance for all product types and containers for food contact packaging are problematic, as this packaging is subject to strict FDA requirements for quality and sanitization. Because of this, it is nearly impossible to use PCR content in most food packaging and remain in compliance with FDA requirements. Ameripen would like to see these provisions for rigid plastic container food packaging removed from 168, or as an alternative, the inclusion of exemptions for products that are unable to meet the set PCR goals because of an inability to obtain letters of no objection from the FDA. Concerning the waiver process, we appreciate that the bill allows for individual companies to petition MDE for temporary waivers for PCR content. However, we would like to see the phrase that specifies that waivers are, quote, not generally applicable to other producers in similar circumstances struck to allow MDE to approve waivers based on circumstances that might make the inclusion of PCR content infeasible for all companies in the packaging sector rather than single companies approved one at a time. In conclusion, Ameripen recognizes the need to drive growth of end markets for the reuse of packaging materials, as this plays a significant role in reducing the environmental burden of materials by increasing resource efficiency. However, we caution that the recycled content mandates in HB 168 as drafted will not necessarily achieve these stated goals.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and honorable members of the committee. My name is Sarah Price, and I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Retailers Alliance. I do first want to thank the Sierra Club for working to address our concerns from last year regarding some of the language regarding private labels and producers. But we do still have some concerns about whether the recycling market will be able to meet the demands set in this legislation. I know it is true that this policy could pass without the EPR study, but we know that the state is gathering more information about recycling, and we have historically urged the legislature to treat recycling and the waste stream and packaging requirements in a holistic manner and to look at the full picture. And knowing that information is still coming to you later this year, we would ask that you just pause the policy until we have as much information to look at as possible and try to address everything collectively next year. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Adam Peer, and I represent the American Chemistry Council, and ACC respectfully requests that the committee oppose this legislation in its current form for 3 reasons. First, it is unlikely to increase recycled content. Secondly, it diverts focus from creating that supply. And lastly, the EPR Study Council should be allowed to complete its work. There is current demand for recycled content. What its issue is creating more supply. and this bill doesn't address how to create more supply through things like infrastructure. As we've seen in other states with similar laws, a requirement without infrastructure focuses resources on compliance and waivers, when more attention should be given to creating that infrastructure to create that supply. And we're also concerned that alternatives could have an increased environmental impact. The good news is Maryland is doing just that through the EPR Advisory Council. We believe that EPR will help create the infrastructure that will help increase both the supply and local demand for recycled content, and in turn help make Maryland more of a circular economy. ACC supports both EPR and increased recycled content use as important elements of a circular economy. The better way to proceed is to allow the work of the study committee to finish. Thank you.
Thanks to each of you. Are there any questions for this panel? I do not see any, so we will turn to our unfavorable virtual witness, Greg Costa from the Consumer Brands Association. Please go ahead, Mr. Costa. You're on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Greg Costa with Consumer Brands Association. We represent the world's leading consumer products companies, and we are represented. We represent about $26 billion in state economic activity and about 260,000 jobs. Having said that, and I've submitted testimony which go over a few concerns, but I think I wanted to just hit that we do have concerns about food safety and certain issues that come up from the technology in the use of second and third generation recycled material. But mostly, we're going through a process, and I know that other witnesses have testified about this regarding the fact that other states are doing this. The New Jersey PCR law, which was passed 2 years ago, a couple of weeks ago, it was 2 years, and has come online as of the 18th of January, is still having problems getting up and running. And they have a very, initially a very confusing waiver process. You cover a waiver process in House Bill 168, and we certainly applaud that. But I think that currently the waiver process in New Jersey is being used by pretty much all of our members. We know that there is just a dearth of this material available across the country, and it is very difficult. We have companies that are competing for this for a newly mandated use in New Jersey that cannot be kept up with. We have manufacturers that in no way, shape, or form are able to manufacture strictly for Maryland or even for the region. There are many companies, think of mid-size bottlers that just can't get their hands on that kind of material. I think that's our biggest concern, and we would appreciate a little bit of time to study this, as prior witnesses have asked for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Are there any further questions from the committee? Okay, I do not see any. So that concludes the bill hearing on HB 168. We're going to jump a little bit out of order to accommodate one of our committee members. We'll bring up HB 120, Delegate Morgan, Economic Development, Maryland Waterman's Microloan Program eligibility. And if you have a panel, please bring them up.
Thank you, Chair Corman, Vice Chairman Boyce, illustrious members of the ENT Committee, which is a fun committee, a good committee, and I will promise you this bill will not be as much fun as the last one, but it's still a good bill. My name is Todd Morgan. I'm here to present House Bill 820 entitled the Potomac Waterman Microloan. The purpose of this bill is to allow watermen in Maryland who are licensed under the Potomac River Fisheries Commission to acquire funds through the Maryland Waterman's Microloan Program. In 2022, the General Assembly established the Maryland Watermen's Microloan Program to provide loan to commercial fishermen in the state of Maryland. Access to the funds requires a tidal fishing license, a commercial fishing license. However, in establishing the program, the wording of the bill inadvertently excluded Maryland residents who fish on the Potomac River, where there are still snakeheads and blue catfish, just by the way. The commercial watermen of the Potomac mostly hold Potomac fishing licenses, not tidal fishing licenses. And however, because of this, they are not eligible for the loan. And this bill simply extends the opportunity to the Potomac River watermen that is available to the rest of the watermen in the state. And I have an amendment in the bill that is already should be in your folders. And I have Stephen McHenry here from Marbidco to explain more details.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be before you again this year. We are here in support of House Bill 120 with 3 amendments that the sponsor is offering. You have my written statement, which is quite detailed and which explains the amendments. Very simply, the amendments correct a drafting error to put the Potomac River licensed watermen in the same posture as Maryland watermen that are licensed by DNR. The bill, the amendment moves up the effective date from October 1st to July 1st to provide 3 additional months for the Potomac fishermen to potentially receive funding from our new microloan program, which is now 1.5 years old. And the third amendment strikes a provision in current law that relates to the loan value that we are authorized to provide. The statute provides that we can make microloans between $7,000 and $15,000. There are 5,600 licensed commercial watermen in Maryland, with another 400 potentially coming from the Potomac River Fisheries Commission licensees who live in Maryland. We don't believe that anywhere near that number are eligible. We actually think it's around 1,100 or 1,200 people. But we didn't have any way to estimate how much demand there would be. So we asked that that cap be put in statute. We're now asking that you remove it and give my board of directors the discretion to manage the program going forward. We believe that we have the resources available today to accommodate the additional watermen who might be eligible for the program. Based on some speculation and talking with DNR, we're guessing that somewhere between 3 and 6 additional microloans will be made annually with the passage of this bill. And with that, I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you both. Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I remember this when this passed in 2022. I love this program. Just a quick question. Can you explain what the difference is with a Potomac fisherman? Is it a different kind of license? I just didn't understand that. Sorry.
You want me to?
Go ahead. Yeah.
There is a bi-state agency known as the Potomac River Fisheries Commission, and it manages the commercial fishing in the main tidal stem of the Potomac River, not the tributaries on either side, in the main stem. So you must have a Potomac River Fisheries Commission license to fish in the Potomac River. The DNR issued license doesn't work there. And there are some Maryland residents who are only licensed by the Potomac River Fisheries Commission who want to be able to participate in the microloan program.
And
Thank
please
you.
Remember, the Maryland does own the Potomac River. That's part of the reason for this.
Okay, thank you so much.
Great. Are there any additional questions? Okay, thank you both. That concludes the bill hearing on HB 120. We'll now turn to HB 22. Our colleague Delegate Ruth. Agriculture pollinator habitat plant, requirements for State Highway Administration.
Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and colleagues on the committee, it's great to see you again. And so I am here with HB 22. This bill passed essentially last year, passed the House. It was in a different posture. It was drafted my intent had always been for it to be drafted in the agriculture article as part of the current pollinator habitat plan that's already required. The drafter put it in the transportation article, and there wasn't time to get that corrected last year. So we had marked it up to reference the pollinator habitat plan. So this year we had it drafted in the correct place, made a couple of minor changes to address concerns that the Senate had, but in other respects, it's essentially the same. So pollinator populations are declining. It's a serious problem because pollinators are essential for the pollination of most of our food crops as well as flowers. So without pollinators, we are in serious problems. And in a minute, Michael Wilpers from the Sierra Club is going to give you more information about that. The General Assembly has done a lot of work on this, taken some good steps, including banning neocotinoids. Okay. We'll just say neonics, and requiring several agencies to have a pollinator habitat plan. SHA does have a pollinator habitat plan, and they've been developing pollinator habitats. But according to their own testimony, they currently have 0.3 of an acre in demonstration sites, with approximately 7 acres coming online this year, including 3 roadside sites. But so we need a lot more than that. They're doing good work, but we need much, much more in order to save the pollinators that we all depend on. This bill really lays the groundwork for SHA to expand what they're doing, to have pollinator habitats along the highways where they have a lot of space, 5,000 miles, I think it is. Is that, yeah, 5,000 miles roughly that they have where they can potentially, not all of that's going to be pollinator habitat, but that's potential place to put it. I did work closely with SHA on the language. They take no position on this bill, but they have informational testimony in the packet. And I did work carefully to make sure the language is flexible enough to give them the latitude for implementation. There is a 2-word amendment from SHA with my testimony in the bill folder that they requested. So HB 22 generally requires SHA to develop policies and procedures to develop and maintain pollinator habitats along state highways using native plants, maintain highway pollinator habitats in accordance with the Federal Highway Administration's best management practices for roadside pollinator habitats. The Federal Highway Administration actually has a manual on this. Provide educational outreach to the general public, community associations, and elected officials regarding SHA's highway pollinator habitats, including signage where appropriate. It doesn't require signage, but that's a tool that they can use. Track federal funding available for the support of pollinator habitats. There is a pollinator habitat highway program in the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act. They have not yet released the notice of funding opportunity for that, but we're really hoping when they release that would be something SHA would apply to. The bill does not require them to apply for anything. It gives them discretion, but it requires them to consider federal funding programs and apply for those that they consider to be appropriate and beneficial. HB 22 requires them to update the pollinator habitat plan annually and post it on the SHA website for public viewing, and publish an annual report on the location and approximate size of any pollinator habitats maintained by SHA, so that the public and all of us know what's out there and where it is. So this is a great potential not only to save pollinators, but by using native plants as is required in the bill, it can help filter runoff, which will help with our water quality, and it will just generally beautify the highways as we're driving along. So with that, I ask for a favorable report, and I'm going to turn it over to Michael.
Thank you, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and the committee. For the record, I'm Michael Wilpers with the Natural Places Committee of the Maryland chapter of Sierra Club. We strongly support SB 178 to help reverse drastic declines in pollinators through minor adjustments to vegetation management along more than, as you heard, 5,000 miles of state roads. Maryland's pollinators, such as bees and butterflies, as you heard, are essential to our fruit and vegetable crops and to our wild trees, shrubs, and flowers. Nearly 1/3 of all bumblebee species are threatened with extinction in North America, as are 20% of butterflies. In Maryland, 3 of our 15 bumblebee species have disappeared entirely from the state. 3 others are now rare, as is the official Maryland state insect, the beautiful Baltimore checker spot butterfly. Causing these declines is a shortage of flowers and habitats for these pollinators, which they need for food and shelter. and both of these can be provided by well-managed roadsides. For this reason, states as diverse as Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Minnesota, Vermont, and Virginia are all managing their roadways to promote habitat for the enchanting monarch butterfly, as well as other pollinators. In Maryland, as you heard, a law requiring pollinator habitat plans for state agencies was passed in 2016, which, in addition to other things, prompted the Department of Transportation to study whether our roadways could also be managed to provide pollinator habitat. The 3-year study in Frederick and Carroll counties showed that with minor adjustments to vegetation management, roadsides supported 68 species of native plants, 83 species of native bees, nearly a fifth of all of Maryland's bees. The study found that these practices show, quote, great potential in supporting pollinators and are timely and practical to implement on a landscape scale. SB 178 would require SHA to develop pollinator habitat plans specifically for roadsides and to follow the Federal Highway Administration guidelines, as you heard. These guidelines promote pollinator habitat only where safety is not compromised. In fact, studies show that roadsides with diverse vegetation combat driver fatigue, enhance driver alertness, and improve highway safety.
Great.
For all these reasons.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it. Are there any questions, Delegate Jacobs?
Don't hit the button. Thank you. Delegate Ruth. And I think I mentioned this once before, but in your pollinator habitat plan, is Department of Natural Resources going to be included in this operation? Because, you know, I believe I mentioned it to you before that, and everybody wants to see more pollinators. I'm not against that concept at all, but that maybe some of these flowers may draw wildlife, deer and whatnot into the roadway. And I'm just wondering if DNR would be included in setting up some of these plans and procedures.
DNR is not specifically mentioned in this bill. Of course, the Highway Administration can consult with DNR, and I would hope that they would consult on that. Actually, in terms of the deer on the roadways, I have another bill on that I'll be presenting to hopefully this committee later, another day.
All right, thank you.
I could add something.
May Michael add something to the answer? Thank you.
Yeah, State Highway Administration is in a draft form, has a 179-page new set of guidelines for vegetation management to promote pollinators, among other things. And they gave a preview of it to the Anne Arundel Bird Club, which I attended. And they're very aware of the distance desired between the roadside, the edge of the road, and where what they call the high meadow would begin, specifically to avoid not only birds being too close to the road and then being drawn into what they call a death trap, but also far enough away so that mammals, when they emerge, if they emerge from the high meadow, would be less likely to try to cross the highway. So it's very much on their agenda in the new guidelines, which will be released in May.
Okay, I do not see any other questions, so thank you both. That concludes the bill hearing on HB 22. We'll now turn to HB 85 from Delegate Wayman, Department of Agriculture Spay and Neuter Fund. Bring them on up. Perfect.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair. For the record, I'm Delegate Mary Lehman, here to present HB 85, which grows the Department of Agriculture Spay and Neuter Grant Fund by increasing the annual fee that manufacturers pay on pet food products sold in Maryland from $100 to $130. That's over a 3-year period. So the fee will go up $10 per year over the next 3 years, leveling out at $130. If the bill sounds familiar, it should. I brought it to you last year. It was discussed numerous times in subcommittee, but not voted on. The difference in this year's bill is that after that fee increase levels out to $130, it is not indexed to inflation, which last year's bill was. So the bill establishes a process for voluntary donations also to the Spay and Neuter Fund, and it does allow the funds to be used for routine vaccinations, specifically rabies, and also for mobile spay and neuter clinics and to transport animals from unserved areas to clinics, usually in another county. So my predecessor, by way of background, my predecessor, Delegate Barbara Frush, actually passed this law in 2013. And it was really pioneering. In fact, many other states have adopted it since then, in some cases almost verbatim, copying the Maryland law. The funds in the Spay Neuter Fund are used to support annual grants to your county shelters and also to nonprofits that do spay and neuter surgery on cats and dogs. So why do we need this? Well, it reduces the animal shelter overpopulation and, of course, our euthanasia rates. In 2022, the General Assembly did support a 10-year reauthorization of the program to 2032, but we did not raise the product fee. Due to inflation that you'll hear about from some of my witnesses and the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, the costs of providing spay and neuter services have risen substantially, and they have strained the already limited funds of the grant program. So just to give you some idea about numbers, in 2018, the Department of Agriculture reported that 16,376 spay and neuter procedures took place through this program. The agency awarded about $893,000. And at that time, each procedure cost $54.52. 5 years later, in 2023, 14,590 procedures were reported. And the cost of each procedure increased to $61.89. Again, from $54.52 to $61.89. So the rise in cost means a decrease in animals being spayed and neutered, which again directly increases that growing number of animals both on our streets and potentially being euthanized at our shelters. I want to point out that we are mindful of the impact that this increased fee would have on the smallest of pet food companies. So the bill does exempt pet food manufacturers. The original law did not exempt any manufacturer of any size. This bill, to increase the fund or increase the fee per product, will exempt those manufacturers that have an annual gross income of less than $500,000. So that way, smaller businesses won't be overly burdened by the higher fee. They will still pay $100. They will not pay the increased fee. So although the Spay and Neuter Fund has resulted in sterilizing more than 110,000 dogs and cats since 2013, Maryland still euthanizes far too many animals. According to the Department of Agriculture, Maryland shelters took in 58,041 animals in 2021 and euthanized 8,431, or 14.5%. This was due in part to the cessation of spay and neuter surgeries during the very first year of COVID. A lot of people don't realize this, but because there was a shortage of PPE, the governor declared that spay and neuter services were not essential surgery, which you can understand relative to the needs of human surgery. And so spaying and neutering was not done for, I believe, about 6 months. Is that correct? About 6 months. So you can imagine what happened to the animal population during that time. It increased, obviously, and also that meant that more animals ended up in shelters. In 2022, our shelters took in 69,346 animals and euthanized more than 9,000. So that trend is moving in the wrong direction. So to conclude, to reduce the number of unwanted pets in Maryland and lower our euthanization rates, we have to grow the Spay and Neuter Fund. It is the most fiscally responsible thing to do, and it is the most humane thing to do for our animal friends. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce. Just wanted to say this is my first time testifying with the new leadership, so welcome. My name is Lisa Radov. I'm the President Chair of Maryland Votes for Animals, here in support of HB 85. Delegate Lehman did an amazing job, and I submitted written testimony, so I don't really want to reiterate all of her excellent points, except for to say we all know that the prices of just about everything have increased since 2013. So it would be reasonable to assume that having some sort of an increase not indexed for inflation, but capped so that it's over 3 years and gradual would be reasonable. We have on our panel some experts from some of the nonprofit animal welfare organizations who really are going to be able to speak to you very specifically about the wonderful work done by this program. This program saves lives and is very important to preserve. We also would like to see and have heard that the underserved areas of Maryland do need assistance. So that is part of what we think that will be important to the passage of this bill for this program, to ensure that people from the underserved areas are going to have the same kind of access as the rest of the state. Thank you very much, and I urge a favorable report.
Good afternoon, Chair Gorman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. My name is Colleen Bowers. I'm a Naval Academy graduate, a Navy veteran turned kitten foster. I've been fostering for about 6 years, and I have saved over 160 kitten lives. I have 4 in my house right now. The original bill's outdated funding is inadequate. It doesn't cover the current spay, neuter, and vaccine costs. Laurel Cats in particular has to supplement money for every single one of the cats that comes into our system. Because of this, we have less money available to care for our sick and injured kitties. Also, very few vet practices will work with us because we need discounted prices as a nonprofit rescue. Because of this, I, as a foster mom, have to make difficult decisions. I have to decide if my kitten is sick enough to go to the vet. For example, I have a cat, Echo, who was found in between our 2 big snowstorms. He came to me with his eyes and nose crusted shut with a severe upper respiratory infection. I used all my tricks and medications, but he still ended up having to go to the vet. We had to beg for an appointment. We can't get appointments. And I waited 2.5 hours to get him seen. This is what all of our fosters go through. I syringe fed this baby, squeezing food into his mouth to get him to eat. I wiped snot off his nose and his eyes. I lost sleep. I did steam treatments, all the things that you do. And I pay for his food and his litter and all these supplies because Laurel Cats doesn't have any extra money for our fosters. Echo's now healthy, but we can't get him a spay or neuter. We can't get him neutered because we can't get an appointment because of these costs. So we can't get adopted yet. It is all connected. If spay and neuter vaccine funding was increased to actually cover costs appropriately, more of our hard-earned donations could be applied to direct kitten care and getting more vets on board to save these kittens' lives. Plus, the more cats we spay and neuter, the fewer orphan kitties that I have to struggle to pull from the brink of death, literally. So please support this bill. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Katie Flory, and I'm the Community Care and Advocacy Director with the Maryland SPCA. I am also the treasurer of PAWS, which is the Professional Animal Workers Society. And I also submitted written testimony, so I don't want to belabor all of those points. What I do want you all to know is part of my job is to go into our under-resourced communities. I spend at least half my week every week there. And there is not one person in this community who doesn't want spay neuter, but they can't get there or they can't afford it. I personally, almost on a weekly basis, am transporting someone and their animal to our spay and neuter clinic so they can receive those services. This bill would go so far in being able to provide the resources that our community needs. Yes, I'm focused on the under-resourced communities, but I'm also here representing the majority of the shelters across the state. There is not one shelter in the state of Maryland that has not seen a rise in intake of animals. I've been in this field almost 20 years. We were doing really good until COVID hit. And now we are seeing, we're going back and we don't need to. I am so incredibly proud of the state of Maryland, where I was born and raised and have lived my entire life, for passing this bill. And we are asking, keep it up. Please keep going. Help us continue to provide these services. I also want to echo what my colleagues said. We're also supplementing money. We want to make sure the animals in our community are taken care of, and the people. And a lot of people in Baltimore City, in fact, everyone in Baltimore City, wants their animal. They want to keep their animal. They want to take care of their animal. But I am faced every day with people saying to me, all right, do I get my animal spayed or neutered, or do I pay my electric bill? There isn't a question of which one they need to do. So we are here to ask you to help us help our communities and the animals that are in Thank you very much for your time.
Are there any questions for this panel? Delegate Ruth?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for this. This is obviously important legislation. So under the grant program, there are two different types of grants. Is that correct? And can you talk briefly about what those two types of grants are, the purposes of those?
Yes, there is funding for low-income individuals to spay and neuter their cats and dogs. And then there also is, there are funds that are that can be used for community cats programs. So different groups that do that kind of work also apply for grants.
And so the impact of the community cats program not being funded, what is the impact of that if there's not enough funding to go around?
Well, we see every year that there are a lot of groups, actually, even as my colleague Katie was talking about just at the shelters, in terms of the community cat population, that it's just mushroomed over the years. And you might also be able to speak about that as well. But just for so many factors, and by controlling the community cats, there's also sort of like a border that helps in terms of spaying and neutering, so that there aren't just tons and tons of cats roaming around and potentially spreading disease.
So when you say community cats, you mean those living in the wild?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm using it. I apologize,
Yes.
everybody. Yes, cats living without owners in the wild.
And so they would just multiply out of control if they're not spayed.
Out of control. Whereas if you get kind of a border, you can spay and neuter, then those cats take the territory and then they're not multiplying, and it keeps the numbers down.
And what's the impact of the other program, the low cost program, not having enough funds?
I can speak to that.
Go ahead.
If we don't have those funds, we can't get the spaying and neutering done. And then we are starting to see animals come into shelters. Another part of my job is pet retention, keeping animals in homes. And that is one of the main reasons. They are reproducing, or they have a male dog who is spraying everywhere and they can't get the neuter done. So they're ending up giving it to the shelter, which is where we're starting to see our intake rise. And on top of the many litters we're seeing, because we can't have the spay and neuter, we're then seeing animals come in that might also have issues, which is compounding on top of things. And we haven't hit kitten season yet. And when that happens, the shelters become full, and then we have to make serious decisions as far as how many animals we can save, or do we have to euthanize? We don't want to do that.
So the impact is people who can't afford spay and neuter are surrendering their pets or their pets' offspring.
Yes.
And some of those will be euthanized.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I do not see any further questions for this panel, so thank you, Delegate Lehman. Don't go far. We have another in-person panel in support. Paula Levitt, Heart for Animals, and Jennifer Bevan-Dangle from the Humane Society.
You want to start? Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Bevan-Dangle. I'm the Humane Society State Director, Humane Society of the United States State Director here in Maryland. You've heard us come in and speak about this bill many, many times. We appreciate the work that this committee has done, reauthorizing the program and having some very meaningful debates about what an appropriate fee increase would look like. We do believe that the sponsors worked very hard over the interim to take some of the feedback we received in the subcommittee last year and to put that into place. So as you see, it is a very simplified fee increase. It is phased in. It has been lowered. It is our belief that this bill reflects sort of the fiscal state of the state. And we hope that we've gotten it to that sweet spot where this committee feels confident putting it forward, because this, as you've heard, is an incredibly critical program. So beyond that, I will simply say me too and thank the committee for your time.
Thank you. And good afternoon. I'm Paula Levitt. I'm the Executive Director of Heart for Animals. We are located in rural Garrett County. And since we have been a recipient of MDA spay neuter program since 2015. Since then, we have our own clinic and we have spay and neutered 3,665 dogs and cats under our Lifesaver program. Most of our clients that fall within the guidelines of the program are from Garrett and Allegheny counties, with a poverty rate of 15% and 18% respectively. Data shows that 18,450 dogs and cats are owned by these families in our area, and assumes that 80% of those pets are unaltered. The MDA spay neuter grant is making a significant difference by helping our low-income neighbors with the funds they need to pay for the surgeries, but we need to do better. HART has seen a decrease in the over the past 4 years in the number of surgeries we've been able to perform since we started the program because of higher costs and surgical supplies and medications. In 2023, the demand for the program was so high in our area that 95% of our surgeries that were funded by this grant were completed by May. We also have another low-cost spay neuter program that we would, but we want to keep our people in the no-cost spay neuter program. Increasing the pet food product fee and voluntary donations would allow organizations such as ours to help reduce the number of unwanted cats and dogs, which in turn will reduce the euthanasia rates in our shelters. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I missed Rachel Jones, the Maryland Department of Agriculture, if you're in the room and want to come up as well. Got to learn to flip the page. Sorry, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Rachel Jones, Government Affairs for the Maryland Department of Agriculture. So as it's already been discussed, HB 85 would create means for individuals to make a voluntary donation to the Spay and Neuter Fund. We imagine that would be done through the MDA's website. It also codifies eligible services to be funded by grant projects and specifies certain types of grant projects. The Spay and Neuter Advisory Board, or the SNAB, was established to maintain the fund within MDA. They coordinate with our agency to set standards and improve the competitive grants. The SNAB guidelines and applications ensure that funding is being used to target the intended goals of reducing the shelter intake and euthanasia rates, and has been very successful since its inception, with approximately 100,000 spay and neuter surgeries. So the bill will provide a means for individuals to make that voluntary donation, and MDA also recognizes that that incremental increase of $10 per year would be more feasible for larger manufacturers. The increased income to the program will be used to offset the rising costs of program administration and provide more funding to be available for grants. Surgical costs have increased, and more funding would help the program to continue funding enough surgeries to have a noticeable impact on the intended targets of reducing shelter surrenders and shelter euthanasia rates. The bill also allows for mobile vet clinic transportation and transportation services to bring animals to and from clinics, which is important. The SNAB guidelines already provide for these services as a means of removing the transportation barrier for getting animals spayed and neutered. And additionally, the program has a capital expense grant application that allows for, among other things, the startup of costs for new clinics, including but not limited to mobile clinics. The SNAB also currently considers the availability of services in a target area and the amount of funding that has gone to the target area in the past when determining funding recommendations. And so when possible, attempts are made to provide some funding to underserved areas to ensure that funds are provided all across the state, as well as the amount that a jurisdiction contributes to shelter intakes and euthanasia statewide. And so with that, MDA respectfully requests a favorable report.
Thank you. I do not see any questions for the panel. So we'll now turn to a virtual favorable witness, Jean Salvatore, Shadowcats. Oh, they're not in the waiting room. How about Savan Kahi, Pet Food Institute? Favorable with amendment?
Good afternoon.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Savan Coy, representing Pet Food Institute. We commend Maryland for the great success of the spay and neuter program at its current funding level. As of December 31st, 2022, shelter intake has been reduced by 27%, and shelter euthanasia has been reduced by 62% since 2014. We support reasonable expansion of the program, but would add that funding routine vaccination goes well beyond the stated goals of reducing shelter intake and euthanasia in Maryland. And we cannot support increased taxes on pet food makers who solely fund the cost of this program. This bill would raise the annual registration cost of each product by 30%. We urge the committee to reject tax increases on pet food makers who already pay a $50 per product registration fee on top of the $100 per product spay and neuter tax, which generates nearly $1 million a year. This is about 10% of pet food makers' budgets for all taxes and fees. This is a significant share for one state. A tax increase would reduce product registrations in Maryland, limit consumer choice, and reduce pet food sales in brick and mortar stores. We respectfully request that money be appropriated from the state budget to pay for program expansion and ask that the committee remove the spay and neuter tax increase and instead provide additional ways for Marylanders to contribute. Such alternative funding sources are already used in Maryland for other programs, like the tax donation checkoff for the Chesapeake Bay Fund and the Chesapeake Bay Trust license plate. Similar mechanisms, as well as appropriation from state funds, should be used to provide the funding for expansion of the program. Thank you for the opportunity to share our views, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, I got to use my gavel, so that was great. Welcome back. Siobhan, can you hear us now? Or would you walk away?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Are there any questions? We do have a question from Vice Chair Boyce.
Thank you, Siobhan. Can you tell me the last time fees were increased?
Sorry, can you hear us on the Zoom?
Siobhan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Can you tell the committee the last time the fees were raised?
I believe the fees were raised in the last raise in 2015. They have gone up incrementally since the initial implementation of the bill when it was passed in 2015. So a gradual increase from 2013, 2014, 2015. And Maryland has the highest spay and neuter tax in the country.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Okay, at long last, that concludes the bill hearing on HB 85. We'll now turn to HB 173. Delegate Lehman again. State buildings and state highways collection of yard waste. And please bring up your panel.
Again, our representative, Mr. Baylor, is coming up with me. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon again, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and esteemed colleagues. Again, for the record, Delegate Mary Lehman, here asking for your favorable report on House Bill 173. This bill prohibits both state employees and contractors from using single-use plastic bags for yard waste when working on state lands and along state highways. The bill requires state employees and contractors to use either a compostable container, such as a paper yard waste bag, or a container that will not be discarded when the yard waste is dumped, is transported away. And that would be a receptacle that you would reuse like at home. Under current Maryland law, there are no restrictions on the employment of single-use plastic containers for yard waste on state property. So the bill applies to rights-of-way along state roads and the grounds of state buildings, and these would include colleges and universities that are owned or operated by the state, public mass transportation, terminals and stations, state parks, and recreation areas. The bill ensures that yard waste collected on state lands is disposed of in a more environmentally conscious manner. When single-use plastic bags are used for collected yard waste, the waste and the bag end up often in landfills. According to the World Wildlife Fund, plastic bags can take up to 20 years to break down. If an employer or contractor composts the yard waste, the plastic bag then ends up shredded at a composting site along with the yard waste. And then disintegrating plastic forces a compost facility to either invest in imperfect plastic screening technology, which adds time and money to an already slow and expensive process, or they end up producing a contaminated product. As we speak, here today, more than a third of our counties have similar policies for residential yard waste pickup, and I believe it's time for the state to hold its employees and contractors to the same standard. You do have letters of information from MDE and DNR, and MDE and DNR are both favorable with amendment. Mr. Baylor will be describing that amendment to deal with noxious weeds and invasive species. I view it as a friendly amendment, and I thank you for your time and consideration and urge a favorable report of House Bill 173. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. Dylan Baylor, Legislative Director at the Department of Natural Resources, here testifying favorable with amendment on House Bill 173. Firstly, I'd like to thank the sponsor in this committee for their leadership on this issue of banning and continue to weed out, pun intended, single-use plastic bags. And I think this bill is a really good step in the right direction. And the department is excited about implementation of it. Delegate Lehman touched on vastly what the bill does. So I just want to touch on what our amendment, the amendment we're seeking does. And I love the Department of Natural Resources because I'm constantly learning. So there is a practice called solarization that is a best practice for the discard and removal of invasive species. And that is basically when we bag the invasive species and we put it in a black plastic bag and we allow it to bake in the sun, so that way it gets to a high enough temperature where it kills the seeds and the roots. Phragmites, for example, which are the reeds that everybody sees, those are an invasive species, and without solarization, the roots of those species and the seeds stay alive for up to 4 months. So we really want to continue to use black plastic bags in that situation to prevent the further spread of invasive species. But with that, that's the only small exemption, and we don't use that method that often. We just wouldn't want to be precluded from doing that in the future, to continue to focus on invasive species removal across the state and through our work. And then with that, I would respectfully request a favorable report on House Bill 173 and thank Delegate Lehman again for her leadership on this issue.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Boyce.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan. I appreciate it. Can you tell me what happens after you smother these invasives to death?
Yeah. So it depends on where it's located. First, typically they would go to a landfill still, because we still want to do everything we can to protect, the spread of invasives. If there is a compost facility after their solarization and we feel really comfortable that they have baked in the sun for long enough, then we would allow them to go into that composting facility, but still typically go to a landfill.
So it wouldn't go to like a commercial size composting facility where the heat is higher, and it would just.
It depends on where the work is being done across the state.
So landfill or composting.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
I do not see any additional questions, so thank you both very much. We'll now turn to the favorable with amendment witness, Chaz Miller from the Maryland Recycling Network.
Good afternoon. I'm Chaz Miller. I chair the Maryland Recycling Network's Legislative Task Force. Our members manage many, if not all, of the local government yard waste collection and composting programs in Maryland. We support HB 173 with an amendment, and we thank Delegate Lehman for introducing this bill. Yard trimmings, leaves, grass, and branches are commonly collected for composting by local governments throughout Maryland. MDE's most recent waste and recycling report showed more than 384,000 tons of yard trimmings managed at 22 permitted composting facilities operating in 12 Maryland counties. This is a tremendous success story. Adding yard waste collection from state-owned properties and highways will only add to our success. We support one amendment. The bill calls for collecting these materials in compostable or reusable containers. We believe that paper containers should be required instead of compostable containers. Virtually all, if not all, of Maryland's yard waste collection programs require paper or reusable containers for these materials. We believe that allowing the use of compostable containers made of materials other than paper will create confusion in existing local yard waste programs. We urge the passage of this legislation with that amendment. Maryland's environment will benefit. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this witness? I do not see any, so that concludes the bill hearing on HB 173. We'll now turn to HB 233, which is from the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Critical Areas Area Commission. So let's call it the commission. It's a departmental bill. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. I warned you we would be back, and here we are. With me today is Catherine Charbonneau, our Executive Director, and Lisa Herger, our Legislative Coordinator. They're available to answer any questions that you may have. We do respectfully request a favorable report on this departmental bill. When we really appreciated the opportunity to speak with you at length a few weeks ago on many of the issues that we see coming up before the commission more and more frequently, and the impacts and consequences, especially on the matters of equity and climate change that we increasingly need to deal with. The good news is that the state has an established, effective, deeply rooted partnership managing issues on our shorelines. The bad news is we can't manage these issues that the bill deals with effectively because those words do not appear in our statute. They're not part of our charge. So we are asking this committee and the legislature for the word to act. Right now, we can only consider today despite about increasing certainty about what we are facing, and despite the pressing need to acknowledge some of the disparities that we see in our shoreline communities. How the bill does that, I want to work through that very briefly. First, it includes climate and equity in the decision-making, direct decision-making of the commission. We do issue approvals and denials and modifications to state and local government projects and requests for intensification, known as growth allocation. And we'd like the ability to consider these impacts in that decision-making. Unlike departments, the commission has rulemaking authority that is specifically limited by a list of subjects. And climate and equity are not in that list of subject matter on which we can make rules. These rules are important because they help direct and acknowledge the work of local jurisdictions in their local programs. And so we want to be able to incorporate rulemaking on these matters as well, and that is in the bill. I want to say real briefly a word about our rulemaking because it's a very collaborative process. As much as I, as the chair, would like just to write rules and have them published, it's not the way it works for the commission. Our entire commission, which is heavily represented by local jurisdictions, votes on our regulations before they can be published, both draft and final. So there's a lot of input in that rulemaking process as we work out the specifics of the topics in this bill. Thirdly, the bill includes a number of administrative improvements that are meant to make the work of the commission and our local partners more efficient. I'll just touch on a few of those. First, it allows for a measured increase in lot coverage on small lots. Right now, those requests go through local variance processes, which are expensive, time-consuming, and do not result in optimal outcomes in most cases. We would like to be able to manage that more directly. Secondly, it allows a little bit more flexibility for accessory dwelling units in the critical area. We recognize that there is a housing crisis in Maryland. We want to be able to do our part. And so we're looking for some changes in line with the task force that's working on these issues, staffed by MDP. Thirdly, it would allow voluntarily at the discretion of the local government programs for transfer of development rights. This, in many cases, can preserve equity in properties that by all objective accounts should not be developed by moving that density elsewhere. Fourth, it clarifies the process for mapping mistakes and how we deal with those. As a commission, there was a court decision some years ago that muddied those waters, frankly, and we're looking to incorporate the clear parts of that decision-making into our process. Five, it includes some more clear accounting standards for fee in lieu. This is money that a developer pays to a local jurisdiction when they cannot offset their impacts directly. We want to make sure we know what that money was taken in for and where it is going, in part because if we know what it was taken in for and where it's going, we can actually help leverage that money and provide the local jurisdiction more options in spending it. Just a word about how we constructed this bill. We tried wherever we could to use familiar and tested approaches elsewhere in state law. Quick example of that. We're giving local jurisdictions more time to update their local programs. This is a real struggle for them. It has been 6 years. We're giving local jurisdictions 10 years. But along with that, there's an accountability measure in there as well. And this parallels what's already in place for comprehensive planning in the land use article. We also tried to use definitions that this body has already approved wherever possible. Resourcing this effort, time, tools, and treasure, I think is all part of the solution here. First, this would be a rolling schedule of updates. So there wouldn't be one deadline for every local jurisdiction has to meet all at once. We understand that everyone's in a slightly different place. So these updates roll out over a period of years. Secondly, we're looking to produce technical assistance such as a model ordinance. We're looking to realign our staff to make sure that we're available to local jurisdictions to carry out this work. And thirdly, the commission does have a local assistance fund that we're looking to align to support financially some of the changes that need to be made, especially in our jurisdictions that really do struggle with resources on these issues. So in conclusion, I would impress upon the committee that these changes, we believe, are very much overdue. The last time our statute was updated was 2008, so it's been a while. But we also believe these changes are doable. We believe they would be heavily impactful for our shoreline communities. And we have been working very closely with stakeholders along the way. And on that regard, I did want to note that the Maryland Association of Counties brought a set of amendments to us. We have worked with them. We believe we have agreement with MACO. We were not able to submit them to the committee by the testimony deadline, but we will be very shortly. So with that, Mr. Chairman, turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Delegate Tarasa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this introduction of this. Can you tell me some more about what this proposes to do with transfer of development rights and ADUs?
Absolutely. Thank you, Delegate. We'll begin with transfer of development rights. So many local jurisdictions have existing TDR programs. This would not alter those existing programs in any way. What it would do is specifically authorize a TDR program for the local jurisdiction within the critical area itself to help address situations where we have properties that are likely to be, frankly, underwater, and where more intense development is not appropriate. It's an optional program, and we would work with the local jurisdiction on the specifics, but we wanted to make sure they had the opportunity to do that.
So with regard to the local jurisdictions TDR program, is this, I guess I'm trying to understand what this does to the land in the critical areas. Like this authorizes TDRs in those areas, or would they still have to comply with, like, let's say that local jurisdiction doesn't have those in the TDR areas or doesn't want to, then what happens?
If the local jurisdiction doesn't want to, they don't have to. It's entirely optional within the bill. What the bill specifically allows is for the commission to make rules allowing it for a local jurisdiction. Just a quick example. Maybe you have a property that has 8 development rights on it, but we know that 60% or 80% of that ground is really not fit for putting a structure that's going to be there for 50 or 75, 100 years. This, if the local government chooses, would allow the property owner to sell some or all of those development rights to a developer who's building somewhere that is less impacted by rising sea levels or erosion or repeated flooding. So the number of units in the critical area in total would not change. We're simply moving them out of harm's way.
I guess I'm just trying to understand, are you actually allowing them to be placed somewhere else? Wouldn't the local jurisdiction have to allow that?
Absolutely. So we would set the framework, and then they would come in and adopt a program consistent with that framework if they so choose.
Okay. And what about the ADUs? Where's that referred? I maybe didn't read the entire thing here yet.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, if I could ask Kate to walk us through the ADU provisions, because they're a little bit more technical.
Yes, give me 1 second. I can turn you to the page number. So if you go to page 23, well, 22 and 23 of the bill. So currently within the resource conservation area of the critical area, which makes up about 80% of our critical area, we do have a density restriction of 1 dwelling unit per 20 acres. The law already allows for an accessory dwelling unit within the RCA for an existing dwelling that does not exceed, so it does not count against that density. So if you have only 5 acres and a house, you typically would not be allowed to have a second dwelling under our density limits, but you can have an accessory dwelling unit. That's already existing law. We're simply providing a little bit more flexibility in the options of allowing both an enclosed structure within a house, so providing a little bit larger footprint to accommodate, that's consistent with a second building structure that's allowed. So there's a little bit more flexibility to allow for them. And then we're also looking at one of the amendments we're looking at is the septic issue is regulated differently from county to county. And we don't really think that we need to have any restrictions on how septic might be permitted, as long as we can meet the size and the location requirements.
So the ADUs would be allowed to the extent that the local jurisdiction allows them?
Yes, so the way Correct. So a local jurisdiction may consider is how the law is currently drafted. But if they don't allow for ADUs within their zoning, they don't have to implement this part of
Okay.
the law.
Great, thank you.
Delegate Healy.
She asked my question.
Okay, are there any other questions for this panel? Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher, have you looked at the amendments offered by two or three of the other, like, I think it's NAIOP and Maryland Builders and Mako. Have you seen their amendments that they've offered?
So we have worked closely with Mako, and we believe that we've come to an agreement on a set of amendments that satisfies them. I think Dom's here and he can speak more directly to that. I'm in communication with NIOP. I have not looked at their amendments specifically, but certainly through this process, we're happy to take another look at those.
No, I think that a couple of them were concerned with on page 6, line 12, where you're emitting wherever possible in the buffer of at least 100 feet. So I would assume wherever possible, if you take that out of this language, then 100 feet is going to be the standard.
Yes, I have had a conversation with Mr. Valentine about that language specifically. And the reason why wherever possible is proposed to be removed is because that it turns out that we can have a buffer of 100 feet everywhere. And we do have a buffer of 100 feet everywhere in the critical area. What's different is how that 100 feet is managed. So in an area such as Baltimore City that is more intensively developed, there are different rules for what happens in that first 100 feet. So we view it as a technical correction that reflects the reality of the critical area at present.
And also I've heard from some landowners in some of the Eastern Shore counties where the rivers running, the bay the land runs in and out, that they're concerned that they'll be losing farmland as a result of this legislation. Is that true or is not true?
We believe that is not true. There are no provisions to change the agricultural component of the critical area whatsoever.
All right, thank you.
I do not see any further questions for this panel, so thank you. We'll call up a bunch of other in-person favorable witnesses. David Namazi from UMCES, Matthew Johnston from Arundel Rivers Federation, Doug Myers from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and Annie Richards from Shore Rivers. And please, one of you just go ahead and get started.
Sure. For the record, my name is Dave Namazi. I'm the Chief of Staff at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. Thank you, Chair Corman and members of the committee for allowing me to provide testimony in support of HB 233 today. With more than 3,000 miles of shoreline in Maryland, its coastal communities face a particular set of risks associated with the impacts of a changing climate. Maryland's coastline is literally on the front line of impacts from climate change, such as sea level rise, storm surge, and coastal and precipitation flooding. UMCES's sea level rise projections, which were done in 2023, found that sea level rise along Maryland shores will very likely rise a foot between the years of 2000 and 2050, which is the same amount as all of the last century, and could even rise much more than that, depending upon how we, as a global society, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, the tools to develop predictions that are being applied to understanding the rate and impact of climate change are getting more accurate and can be used on a smaller scales. For example, storm surges caused by extreme weather can now accurately identify vulnerable areas on a street-by-street scale by combining field tools associated with weather events and water gauges, as well as powerful computer modeling. Finally, it is important to recognize that the impacts of climate change will disproportionately impact those who can least afford the changes. That is a key reason why it is crucial for the Critical Area Commission to consider environmental justice and equity into its decision-making process. UMC supports HB 233 and seeks the committee's favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Matt Johnston. I'm the Executive Director of Arundel Rivers Federation, a local watershed group based here in Anne Arundel County. We represent 3,500 residents of Anne Arundel County who fight to protect and preserve the Southwest and Road rivers. I'm here because we are often, all of us watershed groups, are often the front lines, the first people that the community calls whenever they need to treat water or store water that they're seeing in their communities within the critical area. It's no secret to any of us that this is happening more and more often, that waters are rising, whether that be from large storms, from precipitation, or from storms off the shore that are increasing high tides and flooding our communities. I just want to give you an example of why I think this legislation is right for this time. Just this week, I was down at Holland Point, a community in the far southern reaches of Anne Arundel County. And normally I'd go down there and I'd assess where we could put rain gardens to treat stormwater because we're a watershed organization. But instead they said, how do we treat our flooding? I said, well, let's take a look. Let's walk around. Where's the water already accumulating? And sure enough, there was a property with a vacant house with flood water covering about 80% of it. And the property owner came out and talked to me and said, what are you doing here? And I said, we're assessing where we might be able to store water. And that property owner said, well, hopefully not here. I plan to build. That's exactly what we're talking about whenever we reference this critical area legislation. Whenever we build there, the water will rise elsewhere. And we hope that you will support this bill and support updating the critical area law. And if I could for just a moment put on an old hat, I was a commissioner for Anne Arundel County on the Critical Area Commission. And I can tell you that you have no better public servants than those who sit behind me to do this rulemaking process and engage all the stakeholders to get it right.
Good afternoon, Chair and Vice Chair. And Vice Chair, I really appreciate your little reef ball. And members of the committee, my name is Doug Myers. I'm the Maryland Senior Scientist at Chesapeake Bay Foundation here in support of HB 233. The critical area is crucial habitat for aquatic creatures and it's moving. And this is a bill that is definitely understanding that and affecting state policy to deal with that reality. Sea level rise and increased precipitation are also affecting environmental justice communities throughout the state. And I think you've heard from the commission about how that could be addressed through this transfer of development rights and other things. Imagine the best properties that are being inundated could be new public access sites for underserved communities, and you would be able to preserve the development rights for those people who currently own it. The statutory change will also set a framework for the regulation changes that we're currently discussing with the Department of Agriculture to be able to provide some soft landing for farms that are currently experiencing sea level rise and saltwater intrusion. Currently, we don't have a very focused way to look at easements or buffer programs or things that would be able to pay for the ecological services that are currently happening within the critical area that are on agricultural lands. So with those thoughts, I would love to seek the committee's favorable report. Thank you.
Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, thank you very much. My name is Annie Richards. I am your Chester Riverkeeper. I'm happy to testify in support of HB 233 on behalf of Shore Rivers. We are the voice for waterways of the Eastern Shore using science-based advocacy, restoration, and education. The Eastern Shore is a famously low-lying area of the state. Significant rain events and tidal inundation are accelerating shoreline erosion and stormwater runoff, touted by the Bay Program scientists as the fastest growing source of non-point source pollution. These events have massive impacts on our waterways, and it's all happening in our aptly named critical area. The critical area has an 80% delivery rate of nutrient pollution compared to 30% for land uses outside 1,000 feet of tidal waters. This delivery rate can be augmented by flooding from climate impacts. A recent study from the Bay Program's CESAR report found that nitrogen delivery loads can exceed its entire annual TMDL allocation by 30% in just one flood event. Not only is the critical area our final barrier for pollution, it is our first line of defense for vulnerable communities. As Riverkeeper, I am a resource for communities and municipalities whose infrastructure is threatened by current climate impacts. Finding solutions for communities who routinely suffer from flooding and stormwater impacts is no easy task for environmental advocates or for county planners. HB 233 will allow our Critical Area Commission to work more effectively with local planning offices to site development in more responsible, resilient locations, alleviating future struggles for counties and for property owners. Despite the Eastern Shore being known for its rural landscape, there's comparatively little open space for public access. Property in the critical area is valuable to develop, and in excess, that development landlocks some communities. Establishing equity considerations for the commission increases the potential for public access so that no Marylander is left behind when it comes to enjoying Chesapeake Bay waterways. Thank you, and I urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Doug, my ears perked up when you talked about the idea of easements or buffers for farmlands that are becoming inundated slowly or subject to saltwater intrusion. And maybe I missed sort of the context for your comment. Does this bill give the commission authority to purchase easements in that way, or what would be the connection?
I think that the broad statutory changes that were described by the commission are consistent with the conversation happening around easements. Like what the commissioner said, they kind of lack the authority to even consider those things. So they can't put them into their regulations in the current condition. They can put those into regulations as the commissioner said they can, that the commission would approve that. So there's already local governments involved in that process. And then they mentioned an ordinance, a model ordinance, which can then further, I think, handheld jurisdictions who are dealing with this issue. This is very slope dependent phenomenon. We would love to see the steeper slopes forested in those areas where they're going to provide the best water quality benefit, and in the places where are very low lying and shallower slopes. Those areas already contain wetlands in a lot of cases. Those tidal wetlands are very crucial for with a blue carbon, which is actually identified in the state's climate pathway as one of the important things to maintain about coastal wetlands. So we think that being able to accommodate easements, buffer programs, things like that more easily by having the conversation with the local governments is like, okay, don't just wait for everything to be inundated and freak out. Let's create the programs, let's create the structure that'll allow us to address those concerns as they come up. You can only plant so many crops in saltwater and have them survive. So if we don't have a way for those lands to be able to accommodate the ecosystem services that are important now and in the future at a different sea level, then we're going to lose those values that currently accrue to the property owner.
Great, thanks for explaining. Makes sense. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, do not see any, so thank you all. We have one favorable amendment in-person witness, Don Bochco from the Maryland Association of Counties.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Dom with Mako here, favorable with amendment, and to urge a favorable report with amendment on House Bill 233. I want to give a big shout out to the Critical Area Commission and Eric and his team. He's worked with us extensively to address all of our concerns. There's a number of amendments in our testimony. I'm happy to share that the commission has accepted most of those conceptually. They will get you the text, but I think we're in a very good place right now. And again, he has worked hand in hand. He sat down with our technical folks across all the impacted jurisdictions and walked through a lot of our concerns. So again, Mako urges a favorable report with amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you mind, just for my benefit, outlining what those amendments would do?
Yes. So Few things. So first, you will see there's going to be some clarifying language around ADUs and how we measure those. There was some confusion with how the initial draft came in, and we worked that out. They will have that clarifying language. Additionally, there was some conversation around how the extensions would be offered if a local jurisdiction wasn't in compliance. And so initially, you would get a 1-year extension if a local jurisdiction needed it. Additionally, there would be a 2-year buffer period. And so really you're talking 3 years until the Critical Area Commission would be able to come in and say, listen, you have not done your duty to update this. And they would more or less adopt whatever the model ordinance is for the state. And so we feel like that's enough time. Also, we had some notification elements put in that where the Critical Area Commission would have to document that they are notifying the local jurisdiction that they're not in compliance. And I think that covers most of, and then one final amendment. So there is a provision talking about grants that local jurisdictions can apply to the commission for. And there was some ambiguity around the deadline and whether that should be a hard or soft deadline. And so we asked the commission for some flexibility around that and at their discretion, making that a soft deadline.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions? Okay, thank you very much. That concludes the bill hearing on HB 233. We'll turn to our final bill of the day, HB 234, Department of Agriculture, licensing, registration fees, penalties, and regulations. Mr. Secretary, thanks for your patience.
Sure. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to come before you to support HB 234. For the record, my name is Kevin Addix. Had to just make sure. Secretary of Agriculture. And this bill does 3 things, and I'll just very briefly cover the high level aspects and then cede my time to Rachel Jones, who can get into the nitty gritty. First of all, the bill allows MDA to adjust fees to address inflation and also to address the reality that many of these are special funded programs and they are funded through the fees that are collected. And those fees end up supporting inspectors and our team members who are running the tests and making sure that all of the customers of ours are in compliance. Secondly, it gives the department the tools to increase compliance. So it does go through and raises some of the penalties and gives the department the sticks to match the carrots that we so often use in the industry. And finally, it does so in a way that will allow MDA to better meet the goals, not only of the legislature, but the governor. And that is to make sure that agriculture is not only thriving, but is doing what it can to support the health of the Chesapeake Bay, the health of soil. The fees, if you look at the fees, they are it gives us the ability to raise them through regulation or administration. We're not looking to be the highest game in town. We're looking to be comparable to our state. Some of these fees have not been raised since 1989. And you can imagine that the cost of labor, the cost of equipment has gone up significantly, and we've been stuck with some fees that do not represent the market. And then one last thing on the fines. So it does institute the ability for us to collect fines when there's non-compliance. And that's something that we've dealt with over the years, where we have programs like nutrient management where 98% of the time farmers are in compliance. The others need some nudging. And our fines have been low and they've been inflexible. And this gives us the flexibility to have fines. And then once someone comes into compliance, if we can waive them, we'll waive the fines. It's not a fine collection measure. It is just our ability to enforce. So with that, I will turn it over to Rachel Jones, who can get into details, and we're happy to answer questions.
Okay. So good afternoon again. So the bill will allow the department to establish registration fees, late penalty fees, and modify the penalty fee structures for 4 of our MDA programs or units. Those are our nutrient management program, weights and measures, our state apiarist, and the Maryland Horse Industry Board. The legislation will increase agency efficiency, significantly reduce administrative burden, and allow specially funded programs to have adequate funding for staff and incentivize greater compliance for those currently non-compliant with existing state law. So I'll break this down. The very first aspect of the bill is a nutrient management plan alteration of the penalty. The proposed legislation would alter the penalty so that if a farmer submits their annual implementation report, which is how we get their information on their nutrient management plan, so we know what they put into the soil each year, that report is due by March 1st annually. And currently, if you fail to report by March 1st, you get a 30-day notice, a 60-day notice, a 90-day notice. After 90 days, you are charged a penalty of not less than $1,000 for noncompliance. What we are seeking to do with this bill is to make it so that upon the 30-day notice, if you fail to report, the fee is automatically not less than $1,000. So it removes that scale. And again, that is to incentivize farm operators to report their nutrient management practices on time. That will help us to meet our Chesapeake Bay goals a little bit better, in addition to the Climate Change Solutions Now Act goals. If you want to know an average, over the past 3 years, between 30 and 61 operators were sent to collections and ended up paying that not less than $1,000 penalty. So the current tiered penalty would just be removed. And so we estimate that we would cap that not less than $1,000 at $1,500 or $2,000. The goal is not to make money off of the farm operators or the industry. It is to incentivize greater compliance and again, reduce administrative burden. The next component of the bill is an apiary registration fee. So the proposed legislation would allow the apiary program, which is our beekeeping program, to request the use of fines as determined by the secretary for beekeepers that fail to register. The fines are requested also for beekeepers that don't follow instructions for destruction or removal of those hives as required. So there's existing law that requires beekeepers to register so that we know where the colonies are, that we can inspect them for disease and help to mitigate any issues. And again, make sure that those hives are destroyed of properly. The existing law also requires that hives have removable and movable frames to make those inspections easier. And so this bill would just allow us to have some sort of enforcement arm by basically saying there's no registration fee, but if you fail to register, there would be a penalty of $25 after 30 days and up to $100 after 90 days. And again, it's only if you're not complying that you would be subject to those fees. The next is our weights and measures program. So presently, our Maryland Weights and Measures program has a total of 6,311 business accounts registered. So if you're wondering, this is part of our consumer protection. This is part of one of our programs that works on consumer protection. And so weights and measures, our inspectors go across the state. They inspect your gas pumps. They inspect every scale in your grocery stores and your retail stores to make sure that you are getting the price that's listed for your seafood, your meat, your produce, and your gas. Those fees are not in the general fund. Those fees this program is specially funded, not from the general fund. So that means, as the secretary has already stated, some of those fees have not been increased since 1989, 1994, 2004. And so as a result of inflation and cost of living, we have folks who are state employees who are inspectors in that program who are barely making or just now making minimum wage, but they're state employees. And so in order for us to be able to fully staff that program and pay people adequate salaries and truly leave no one behind, we need to be able to increase our special funds for these programs. In addition to that, weights and measures are also defined by NIST, and obviously Maryland follows those definitions. And electric vehicle chargers are considered one of the devices that we are supposed to have the authority to inspect and make sure that they're properly, the same way we properly calibrate scales and other measuring devices, we're supposed to be able to do that with electric vehicle chargers as well. However, because we don't have enough funding in our special funded program, we don't have the equipment to even be able to do that. So while we get complaints on a regular basis of people who think, I've plugged my vehicle in, but I don't think that it was working properly. It says it's fully charged. It's not. We have no way for consumer protection currently to ensure that those chargers are working like they're supposed to. And so allowing us the flexibility to increase the special fund, the fees for weights and measures would give us the ability to do that. Additionally, a late fee again, because currently there's a registration fee. Retailers and grocers and again, the major gas stations are required to register their devices with us, but we have no late fee. So if someone doesn't register, we have no enforcement capability. And so we're asking for the ability to do that. And lastly, the Maryland Horse Industry Board is requesting a late fee and reinstatement fee. Same thing. We have over 800 licensed stables and boarding facilities across the state that bring people onto their property for riding lessons or some sort of public engagement in the equine field. And currently, the Horse Industry Board spends a lot of time knocking on people's doors, making phone calls, sending letters and emails, repeatedly asking people to renew their registration in time, because otherwise, they're supposed to issue a cease and desist for these operations who have not renewed their registration. And so this is, again, to reduce administrative burden and ensure or promote greater compliance from those who are currently non-compliant. And so of all these fees, the only one that is really necessary to increase our funding are the weights and measure fee increases. The rest of them are mostly to reduce administrative burden and incentivize greater compliance. And with that, we ask for a favorable report.
Thank you very much. Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much. My ears perked up when I heard you talking about beekeepers. So I wanted to ask a quick question. Your coverage for this and try to keep people registered and doing all of that. I know of a lot of beekeepers in urbanized areas inside the DC Beltway where I live. And I wondered if I mean, we don't think of those as farms, you know, they're just in somebody's backyard, but they have a whole cluster of them and they sell honey and do all of that. So are they regulated by you? Do they know that they're supposed to be regulated by you? How do you reach them?
Sure. Our state aviaries typically reaches out to those beekeepers. Most folks, when they're getting into that process, some of them do reach out to MDA and consult, how do I get started in this process? And so we happen to know, and there's also a state beekeepers association. And so a few of our employees in our apiary program are members of the Maryland State Beekeepers Board. And so these are things that they share with the beekeepers regularly. And so by law, again, currently they're already required to be registered. And so we can do our part to try to ensure that we're sharing greater information, but we do believe that the majority of beekeepers across the state know that they are supposed to be registered with us. And so it's primarily, again, not that they're farms, but it's about the health of the colonies. It's about public health. Our apiarist explained to us that last summer there was a complaint about a neighborhood pool where there was a swarm of bees and no one could figure out where it came from. So she looked at the list and said, where are all the nearby colonies? And couldn't find a colony within, you know, a certain radius that would have explained where those bees came from. So then she started kind of driving around and happened to see some hives in a backyard area, knocked on a door and just wanted to ask someone, hey, are your bees in your colony like they're currently supposed to be? Because there's a swarm nearby and we're just trying to figure out the source. And because that person wasn't registered, they basically said, we don't have to answer your questions, and sort of slam the door. So it helps us address the complaints that we get in the community, but it also ensures that we know where they are so that if there is a health of the colony issue, mites, disease, what have you, our apiarist has the ability to go and inspect and to help and give guidance on how to mitigate those issues.
Well, thank you. Are they governed by local zoning or anything like that?
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
Are they?
I appreciate it. Thank you for the answer.
Sounds like it's county by county.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question is also about bees. So I think we have a theme going here. Is the fine per hive or is it just per beekeeper for non-compliance?
Per beekeeper.
Okay. There's testimony in here from a beekeeper and it's a little hard to understand. There's a lot of questions being asked, but it seems like their concern, part of their concern has to do with like hives being split and temporary hives and how they can do the count when I guess the number of hives changes. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Sure. So we've had a question about that where a beekeeper asked, what if my number of colonies or hives changes throughout the year? Am I required to report those? Is there a penalty for that? No, it's just every year when you renew your registration annually, you'll say then whether or not there's been an increase or decrease in your colony or your number of hives.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I hate to change the subject from bees, but I'm gonna switch over talking about the EV chargers and those inspections. I guess because I know there's kind of a different schools of thought about who ultimately responsibility should fall to or does fall to in statute when it comes to EV chargers inspections. You know, is it you guys, is the comptroller's office, is the PSC, you know, or some combination thereof? So do you envision, I guess the open-ended version of this question is, what do you envision the Department of Ag's role in that? And would this bill kind of be a mechanism for that, for enforcement as far as inspections go, stuff like that? Do you see a role for the PSC or the comptroller's office? What do you think that looks like?
Well, I thank you for that. I would say that we house the Division of Weights and Measures, and we're trying to measure something. And so, you know, but that said, the comptroller also inspects gas, but the quality of the gas. We're inspecting the quantity, the volume of the gas, because that's the business we're in. I think it's complicated, but we're starting to field a lot of requests from people who think they're being scammed by a charger at this spot or at that location. And we just at the moment are not in that business, and we're feeling like there's a gap and we need to get in it.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, I do not see any other questions for this panel. We do have one other in-person favorable piece of testimony, Lindsay Thompson from the Maryland Grain Producers Association. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Lindsay Thompson here today on behalf of Maryland Grain Producers Association in support of this legislation. I'd like to speak specifically to two components. One, you might be surprised that there is a farm organization and a farmer here in support of increasing administrative penalties for noncompliance with nutrient management. However, in my discussions with my board, they feel very strongly that those that are not in compliance are to the detriment of all of the farmers who are in compliance. The information that goes into the annual implementation reports is the information on nutrient management that is then fed into the Chesapeake Bay model and determines the credit that Maryland farmers get for nutrient management in meeting our Bay goals. And so we do think that increasing the penalties for that and encouraging farmers to report their nutrient management information will be to the betterment of all Maryland farmers. The second issue I'd like to speak to is the registration of the beehives. Maryland is a partner in a program called Field Watch and Bee Watch, and that program allows for the information on those hives as well as other sensitive crops to be fed into an application so that when a farmer or a certified pesticide applicator is planning to do a pesticide application, they can pull up that information and see where there are sensitive crops or beehives so that they can adequately and actively avoid those areas. And without having the registration information for those hives, we would really hate to continue to see incidental off-target applications, right? And so if the department were to have all of that information on those hives, it can actually be fed directly into that system, such as they currently do in New Jersey. And with that, I would urge your favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, that concludes the bill hearing on HB 234 and all of the bill hearings for this afternoon. Thank you all for your engagement. Colleagues, just an FYI, if you didn't get the notice, we will be voting Friday after floor, so keep that time available for a short voting session. Subcommittee announcements, Delegate Stein, Chair Stein.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The Environment Subcommittee will meet virtually at 5:15.
Chair Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Housing and Real Property Subcommittee will meet at 5:15 for a briefing. And following the briefing, we will be having a discussion on 3 bills. And those 3 bills have been emailed to all of you. Housing and Real Property, 5:15, followed by a discussion on 3 bills. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Everybody else set? All right. Have a good rest of your evening. Thank you all.